you would think. Brilliant. Okay, well, welcome everyone to this meeting in public of Sussex Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. I would like to welcome Paul Coburn. I think you're standing, have I pronounced your name right?
Yes, you have, Chair. Thank you very much.
And I think you're standing in for Gurpreet Panu this afternoon, so you're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Also, I'd like to welcome Veronica Jackson, who has joined the board as the board governance officer. Other than Gurpreet, I don't have any other apologies for absence today. I'm not aware of any additional declarations that haven't previously been declared. Good.
Peter, sorry, Peter, for the minutes, could you just record your additional declaration, please?
What one did you have in mind?
The extension of your contract.
Oh, I see.
In London. Thank you.
Oh, I see. Yes, sorry. Yes, I was interim chair of Camden, Islington, Barnet, Enfield and Harrogate for 6 months, and that's been extended for 6 months, and now it ends on the 4th of November. It ends on the 4th of November. Thank you, Hilary. Minutes of the Board of Directors held on 29th of March. Can I take those for approval, please? Appears that I can. We don't have any questions from members of the public. We have been promoting this via social media and other routes, so we are trying to make sure that people understand that this is something that we would welcome. Can I now move to the chair's report? Can I take it for can I take it as read? Are there any questions on the chair's report? Okay, so move to the chief executive's report.
Thank you very much, Peter. Hello, everybody. I wanted to start, I think, because I think we had a quiet but momentous occasion happen since we last met, and that is that the national COVID incident was stepped down after a significant period of time of the NHS being in incident, in major incident and various levels of incident. We now have come out of that, and COVID is now treated like other infections and other ways of working. So I think I just want to take a moment to, first of all, acknowledge all the staff and patients that sadly died during the incident, but also just remember the good work that was done during that incident, and to thank everybody for that. Our incident management team continues their work because of the industrial action, and we've had announced today the proposed dates for the strike that's currently being balloted for consultants as the 20th and 21st of July, and we also have the junior doctor strikes coming up next week. So our incident management team and the executive team are liaising with the system to make sure that our services are safe, our patients are safe during that time, but also we support those who don't want to strike and those that do want to strike to enable them to do what they feel they need to do at this time without prejudice. You'll see from my report that the national framework for the autism assessment pathway has been issued, and we're reviewing that against our approach as well, so that we can look at how that can support improvements in that area. The liberty protection safeguards has been delayed to after the general election. We have been preparing for that, but we're going to continue with the deprivation of liberty safeguards in the meantime. As a system, the integrated care system, we're in the final stages and the final draft of the shared delivery plan for the system, which has 11 work streams, which are listed in the report. As chief executive, the way it's being run is that the SROs for each of the SROs for each of the work streams are chief executives within the system, and I am the SRO for clinical leadership, mental health, learning disability and autism, and workforce. as well as Brighton and Hove. I won't go into any more detail, but when that's finalised, I will make sure that it's shared with the trust, because it's really important that we are committed to the outcomes that are in that shared delivery plan, and they do align with our breakthrough objectives and our internal plans. Over winter, we've made significant progress on our crisis pathway, with fewer people being cared for outside of Sussex and in beds outside of Sussex Partnership Trust. But also we've made significant progress in the number of people being admitted and length of stay. What we've struggled with is time to admit, from when people first are identified as needing a bed to when they actually get a bed. And that's felt quite stubborn. And I think we've done all of the short-term things to make sure that we are doing everything we can to be responsive to the need, but we do have a transformation programme to do ahead of us, and that is in train. But in the meantime, the NHS Sussex have commissioned a report, an independent review of the mental health crisis pathway, which we fully welcome, to help us to think about that and to help develop that. The Violence and Aggression, Violence Prevention and Reduction Annual Report has been issued. It has shown some progress, but I would say not enough progress. We need to continue looking and relentlessly focus on violence and aggression to our patients, to our staff, to our carers and our public, and think about how we do that alongside least restrictive practice, so that we're making sure we are delivering the safest care for both patients and staff. Our Learning for the Future project has finished its 4th phase, and we will send you the PowerPoint about that with all the details, but it's a report that talked about one of the things I took away from it is that a high level of self-reported staff stress that is ongoing from that has grown since the pandemic started. We've had a number of visits from CQC, and we are they have been positive, but with some areas for improvement. So some areas for improvement, including the understanding and application of the Mental Health and Mental Capacity Act in a consistent way. So it's not a blanket statement, no one knew. These statements are more about the consistency of it. So of note, it's Rutland Gardens that came away with absolutely no recommendations from CQC at all, which is absolutely brilliant. But we have had concerns raised about Chalk Hill, and we are doing an intensive piece of work around Chalk Hill. We've had people whistleblowing and we've had some complaints. And as a result, we've done some quality visits that have highlighted some concerns that we have, and we have an improvement plan in place that is being refreshed, but we're also commissioning some independent organisational development work for the leadership team and the team on the ward, which is going to be led by Fumi, our Chief People Officer. That was not a good slip to make, was it, in that context? In terms of governance, so you'll know we are moving to place-based structures, and what we've done is at the same time we've looked at our governance and our reporting structures and the numerous reports and meetings that take place, and what we're trying to do is streamline them so that what comes to Finance and Investment Committee, Audit Committee and Quality Committee is well analysed and responded to before it gets there, so that you are really clear on what the risks are and the actions that need to be taken. So reporting to the Executive Committee, we're going to have people, and we've had the first round of meetings this in May, so that it started. We've got the People and Culture Committee, Quality and Risk Management Committee, Operational Management Committee, Finance Recovery Committee, Data and Digital Committee, Transformation and Improvement Committee and Commissioning Management Committee. And I know 7 sounds a lot, but that is compared to, I think we were getting on for 10s beforehand. So it really has streamlined it, and each of these are exec-led and have a line into one of the board subcommittees and the Executive Committee, so that we have line of sight. I will leave Usman to talk about the finances in the finance reports, but month month one outturn report was a 1.2 million deficit with an overspend of 0.4 million. So we have made progress, but we've still got some way to go. The RISE's full business case is going before NHSE shortly for formal approval. And I've done a brief summary of where we are in our national core indicators in the report, which I won't go into detail here, but what I wanted to do was put a clear, succinct summary in there so that you could see at a glance what we're doing in my report. And I'd welcome any feedback on whether that was helpful or not. As a result, you will be aware we had Deloitte's come and do an analytics report for us, alongside the soft intelligence we have, and both of a qualitative and a quantitative nature. And as a result, we have developed an improvement plan that looks at quality, clinical pathway, transformation, workforce, finance and digital. And we will bring that through the appropriate subcommittees of the board. But I have shared the first draft for comment with system partners, chief executives, because I think it's important that they come on that journey of improvement with us. Finally, I just want to talk about the executive appointments. I'm absolutely delighted to say that a year and a bit after being in post, we have now recruited to every executive post. And Rachel Goldsworthy, who will be starting with us on the 21st of August as our Chief of Staff. And Dr. Gurpreet Panu has been appointed as Chief Delivery and Information Officer following over a year of being the interim in post, and he becomes a voting member of the board. He's no longer a voting member of the board, but Dan Charlton is now a voting member of the board, and that was pre-arranged through the Appointments and Remuneration Committee prior to the appointment. The trust is currently recruiting to a company secretary role, who will report to the chief of staff, but obviously be accountable to Peter and myself. And we're almost at the point of shortlisting for that post. So hopefully that will be in place shortly. So I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question, but are there any questions for Jane on the Chief Exec's report? Anna, please.
So, Jane, you asked for feedback. I think this is really helpful, really clear. I mean, it doesn't even begin to cover, I know, the volume and breadth and depth of work that you do, but I think it's a really helpful view for us and hopefully for those observing this board. And I just wanted to reiterate one point about the change in governance from the point of view of Quality Committee. You know, we certainly got a sense from Teresa that actually this was going to reduce the number of meetings. Yeah. So although it looks like an expansion, it's actually a kind of a rationalization of the current number of meetings that people are having to attend to and the reporting structure. So we were really pleased about that. I mean, obviously we've got to test this out and see how it works, but you know, it really is about trying to reduce rather than increase, isn't it? The number of meetings people have to attend. So
absolutely, and being able to triangulate data easily because of the fewer meetings.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Kevin.
It's a similar theme about governance, yeah, and yes, great set of papers, comprehensive and yet accessible, or a great paper, really good. On governance, just two things. I think we need to be aware that there'll be a significant period of bedding in for the new systems and structures, and I think it's really important, and for all the chairs will know this, to be mindful of all, what used to be and of the transition to what is. So I think we'll all be aware of that. And I guess the question is how much thought has gone into sort of patient involvement, co-production, and yeah, that theme, that lens through the new structures as well as through the old structures, making sure that as we work towards it properly.
Absolutely, and coincidentally, this wasn't planned, lined up in this way. We had a paper to Executive Committee today about service user and carer council and how that can fit with and inform our work on co-production, not just listening to and not just feedback, but co-production, and introducing them in a meaningful way into the organisation rather than tokenism. I'm not saying it's tokenism now, but what we want to do is do it in a really thoughtful way, involving service users in that journey with us.
It's all too easy to just populate every committee with a token representative, if you like, now, and that's definitely the right way around. And could I ask just one last thing on your papers? Full business case for the RISE is fantastic. I guess my question is, as the needs are changing around inpatient and community services, and as we move through what we actually need and what we actually will build, is there room for that specification to change over time before it becomes real?
So I think the nuances inside you can, and we've had a live conversation, I think last week, about that, about whether we need to think about dementia care beds or acute. So there's an ongoing conversation about, is it fit for purpose? Because when things like this take a number of years to build, the population need does change. So it's got to be an iterative conversation, but the footprint remains the same. So there are boundaries within that we can't move from, but there will be stuff that we can influence and change as we go forward.
Thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jo.
Thank you. Jane, I was disappointed to see that the liberty protection safeguards yet again have been deferred. Have they provided any reasons as to why that's the case? And any possibility of a date when it will be implemented?
There has been I'm hesitating because there has been limited communication, other than that it has been deferred to the next after the general election. So I don't think, and then the outcome of the next general election might change. I don't think it's beyond my realm of influence and scope to be able to make a meaningful comment to that, Jo. Sorry.
No, it's just disappointing, because I think this must be about the third year now that it's been deferred, and given the amount of work that we as a trust have invested in training our staff in readiness for it, and the difference it makes to the effective service users, it's really disappointing, but fine, thank you.
So just so you know, we covered that in the MCA this week as well, the MCA MSJ committee. So.
I thought you might have done.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else for Jane? Can I just ask about right care, right person? Because I know that some police constabularies have been, changing their approach to their response to people seriously affected by mental illness. And I didn't know what we were picking up from the Sussex Constabulary, if anything.
So we've had a letter from Sussex Constabulary. I can't say it. Constabulary. That
Force,
word.
police
Thank
force.
you, police force. Through the ICB, and we've been working with NHS Sussex on have issued a response to that. It was pre the right care, right place letter, but that is coming this way as well. So we're very mindful of it. We've done the preemptive work around it. I'm also engaged in some national conversations with the other mental health chief executives about how we approach that together as well. We're also looking at how we manage that internally, because regardless of what's happening nationally and at senior levels, we have to maintain relationships with the police constables on the ground who are seeing our patients now. And we need to make sure we maintain those relationships and good relationships. So we're looking at it at a strategic level and an operational level, how we can manage the two.
Yeah. Do we have the, I mean, in some areas, what they found is that actually one of the drivers of police taking people to A&E is actually substance misuse. So actually there's a significant numbers of people who, if there was a diversion for substance misuse, would not need to go to A&E. And I didn't know if that was something that we'd explored.
I'd have to come back on that.
Okay, all right. But
unless John has the answer to that.
I just think it's quite interesting as to what some of the, I mean, given we just been talking about substance misuse and our approach to alcohol and substance misuse, and I know that one of the key reasons the police get involved is often less to do with mental, well, I mean, in as much as you can separate, less to do with mental health and more to do with substance misuse, and where you've got, as they have in Scotland, an alternative route that often then reduces the demand on A&E and on police time. Sorry, John.
Thank you, Chair. We have had 2 Right Care, Right Place meetings already with Sussex Police. So there is an early implementation group has been set up. But as Jane said, we're seeking to work both strategically and operationally with Sussex Police, and we do have long-standing good relationships with them, and they have dedicated mental health liaison officers. But to your point around substance misuse, I don't think it is as well embedded as we would like. One of the pieces of work that we want to continue to do with the Sussex Police is for them to continue to contact us in advance of using their emergency powers to seek clinical advice. We have the blue light triage, we have the Northwest Sussex blue light triage, so there are ample opportunity for them to do so. And there is also the willingness from Sussex Police to do that. I think that's the area, but we do need to strategically involve our public health commissioners as the commissioners of substance misuse services, because I think it is probably the missing link that we've described.
Okay, thanks, John. Peter.
Thank you. I was just noticing Kevin's question in the chat as to whether it was involved in our review of the urgent care pathway, the crisis pathway. It's not come up in the conversations that I've had as part of that, but I kind of take it in the round that it's important. And I think the opportunity with the right patient, right care agenda is to bring these things now all into the fore and talk to the constabulary about how we do these things differently. Because I think across our careers, we've all had experience of these things being handled better at different phases of our clinical lives. And I think if we were to bring the best together around this, you're absolutely right. We would not have intoxicated people being brought on 136. We would have a much better pathway.
Yeah. Okay. What clearly that's something that's going to be under review in the coming weeks and months. But thank you for those responses this afternoon. Anything else on the Chief Executive's report? Okay, well, thank you, Jane. Thank you. And personally, I do think that actually having the way that's presented is really helpful. I think the next question is how we make sure we're using it. But at this stage of the year, I think having it is really good. I think obviously we would support the reduction in the number of meetings and any improvements that we can in triangulation, and hopefully we'll see that working its way through to the committees and to the board in the coming weeks. I think that the governors in particular will be really pleased to see progress on the Service User and Carer Council. And I think that that's obviously something that they've been pushing for. And I think the fact that we're now responding to that is obviously a good thing in and of itself. But I know that's something that they will welcome. And it's good to hear that, yes, of course, the footprint might well be fixed in terms of rises, but we can continue to learn and develop our thinking around the way we use the facilities. So thank you very much for that. Can I now move us to the strategic review and the first breakthrough objective of the new year, breakthrough objective 3. Colin, I assume I'm coming to you, is that right?
Thank you, Chair. Yes,
Thank you.
John and I are going to do a
Brilliant.
double act.
Brilliant.
So I think, so the presentation is now on decision time, but Veronica, I think you were going to share the presentation as well, please. Thank you. So if we can move to the next slide. So just to, I guess, contextualize, so we've agreed 3 kind of core breakthrough objectives this year. The third, or one of them, being around partnerships, which was very much around working with partners to improve the quality of life in the communities that we serve. Just to obviously kind of sort of caveat that we're currently sort of in the beginning of month 3, so all of our kind of quarterly milestones obviously we will be reporting on in the next kind of sort of board. But in terms of this kind of sort of particular one, the three really kind of key areas that we're focusing on, and we'll kind of sort of funnel down into talking about housing a little bit more. One of which is around our relationship piece with the voluntary sector partners and our strategic leads across the three places, and how do we really understand and build on our relationships. And there's been a number of meetings between our executive and the chief exec of a number of different organizations to look at really trying to improve those relationships and sort of move this provider to provider landscape forward a kind of quantum leap. The second objective is very much around sort of partnership models of delivery. And again, we'll touch on that in a little bit more when we come to talk about rehabilitation services. But we are already starting to see a number of roles that would have traditionally been recruited through SPFT for SPFT staff being delivered by voluntary sector organisations, and to start to develop that kind of integrated model of care and a compact, if you like, in terms of sort of the terms of engagement and how are we going to kind of sort of work differently together. And then the third one is specifically around the kind of the housing related delays, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. Next slide, please. So this slide, I guess, just gives the kind of sort of the context piece in terms of kind of sort of where we're at, and we've got the subsequent sort of data now is being kind of pulled through at the moment. But I think it kind of just depicts a really kind of clear picture about the degree of delays that we see within our inpatient beds that are specifically related to some sort of kind of housing related sort of issue. It counts for over 10,660 days and a proxy cost of about £5 million. So it's a really quite a significant element when we think about the sort of the totality of challenge that we sometimes experience around kind of sort of flow. And I think the last bullet point on this slide is really, really important as well, which is that we often think about housing when we think about the discharges and some of the challenges that we have from a discharge perspective. And actually, if you go back to, sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, then actually housing is one, housing and warmth, etc., is one of those really kind of core central basic things that we have to establish. So we know that challenges around kind of sort of housing is often a pre-admission stressor, and therefore, kind of playing back into this prevention, actually, if we're able to work with partners who specialize in this particular area to really think through some of the preventative approaches, actually, we can probably improve patient outcomes, reduce the demand for inpatient services, and ultimately, if someone does require an inpatient bed, make sure that actually housing isn't an impediment to being able to kind of sort of bring them back out of hospital into the local kind of sort of communities again. So although I think sometimes our lens focuses us around the sort of the delay to discharge part of it, we absolutely need to think of it as being a kind of a really central tenet, if you like, in terms of people's emotional kind of well-being in the community. Next slide, please. I think this is just a kind of a contextual slide in terms of just making sure that collectively we understand what we talk about when we refer to housing related delays, because I think it can sound like kind of quite an opaque sort of title, but actually when you kind of sort of start to get into the sort of the nuts of it, what we're talking about is things that are people who are awaiting things around general needs housing, whether social, owner occupied, privately rented, and we'll come back to one of the schemes that we're piloting at the moment to try and help in that particular area, where we're looking at emergency or temporary housing provided by local authorities, or indeed, as we heard earlier, particularly talking about sort of different opportunities around sort of supported housing environments as well. And we know that housing related delays can be for things that are really kind of quite simple and straightforward in terms of some of the maintenance of someone's property to make sure that they've got the property is safe, the locks are fitted, they've got a fridge, some of those kind of really basic type things, where actually often I think one of the challenges sometimes is we get so tied up in the kind of who's going to pay bit that we forget that actually this is, this is, if someone just gets on and pays and we sort it all out behind the scenes afterwards, that will ultimately kind of give a much sort of much better patient experience. There are other elements of this in terms of sort of things that sort of sit within this space, but for the sake of sort of definition, we take them out of it. Next slide, please. So just in terms of sort of the specifics around sort of the actions that we're focusing on. So one of the big things that we're looking at is around actually working with our partners to think about really introducing housing workers as our core part of our inpatient workforce, and then very much extending those workers out into our community teams as well, so that we are really kind of sort of working to understand very quickly what an individual's housing needs are at point of admission, as opposed to only kind of considering it when we're thinking about point of sort of discharge. So you can see that we're in the process and are on track in terms of recruiting housing workers across West Sussex, Brighton and Hove, with plans to extend into East Sussex by kind of sort of Q2. The second part in terms of just making sure that we've got those embedded relationships with our local authorities, our lower tier authorities that are responsible for kind of sort of housing, and that we've got the ability and the infrastructure to support our workforce to be able to capture and understand these things as quickly as possible. We're looking at developing a kind of sort of an outcomes framework whereby we're talking about trying to think about things in terms of not just the reducing the delays by 10%, but also thinking about actually how do we make sure that we really understand people's housing needs upon admission, and actually where we do put some form of housing support or intervention in place, actually how are we evaluating that there is a kind of a positive and a demonstrable improvement sort of pre and post intervention as well. And then I guess the sort of the last bit, if you like, is actually being able to see a noticeable benefit for both the patients in terms of the kind of the related delays at the sort of the start, but just the fact that actually we're talking about housing as being as core a part of the package of interventions and support and consideration that we're giving people who use our services, as opposed to it being seen as sort of, you know, something out there that someone else is responsible for. And if only we could get them to do something, actually, no, this is about us collectively doing the doing together, and really upskilling and educating our teams to be able to support this more. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to pass over to John at this point, who's going to take us through some more detailed kind of conversation around sort of the rehabilitation pathways. And I guess for us as a board, this sort of the provocative title, I think, is around actually this is about us really thinking about and moving into actually a new way of working, a new way of kind of sort of doing our business. But John, I'll pass across to you.
Thank you very much, Colin. And I think it's probably fair to say, by way of introduction, that this builds on our recent board strategy session where we talked about, as you said, Colin, our board appetite for moving into this space and thinking about what are the strategic and different solutions to this long-standing and perennial challenge. So this slide does exactly what Colin just described, different models, describing different models of care, but specifically operating them in partnership with voluntary and community sector organisations and support to providers of supported housing. So stepping into a new space and stepping beyond perhaps the more traditional relationships with our local authority partners of whether both it's the district and boroughs or a unitary authority. And it describes in these slides the relationship between inpatient and community rehabilitation care, how we can potentially repurpose supported housing models with dedicated in-reach from clinical services, perhaps provided by an organisation such as ourselves, and also working in partnership with housing experts, but providing more than housing, providing support around education, support around employment, support around well-being advice. Can I have the next slide, please? Thanks very much. It's just putting this into a national context. So just to offer colleagues some feedback and reassurance that this is not something that we're developing solely in Sussex. As you can see here, different types of adult mental health supported accommodation are referenced within the GIRFT Getting It Right First Time mental health rehabilitation report, to which Sussex Partnership contributed. It also references within the NICE guidance around working with patients with complex psychosis. And there are two live examples included in the slides, one working with East London Foundation Trust and the other with Camden and Islington, which does exactly what exactly what we've described already, but it also includes details on the outcomes. So what's been better for patients, but also better for our system. Can I have the next slide, please? Thanks very much. This describes the work of the Specialist Assessment MDT, the SAM team. Colleagues may recall on a recent board, we had a patient story where a patient who had been under the care of the SAM team came and spoke to us and shared her experiences of how she had been supported to move out of a long-term hospital placement into the community. What this describes here is the intensive rehabilitation support, very specialist multidisciplinary care, has resulted in a number of our patients who are receiving their care across the UK are now receiving their care both in Sussex, but also in different types of accommodation within mental health supported accommodation, within general needs accommodation, within 24-hour residential care settings, but not in restrictive hospital environments. So better outcomes for patients as a result of intensive MDT support, as well as the obvious improvements in terms of performance and finance. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you very much. So in terms of just some of the specifics, how are we actually progressing this ambition that we've been describing? So 3 particular areas. One, supported tenancies. So we have agreed that we will be trialing, piloting supported tenancies with a community and voluntary sector partner for patients under the care of our community rehabilitation services, with a view to evaluating it and potentially scaling it up. Again, something that we would normally be doing in partnership with our local authorities, but us actually stepping into the role, recognizing that we have the clinical expertise to do it. As I've been describing already, potentially repurposing some of our inpatient rehab estate to consider or develop a different model of supported accommodation, less restrictive, better outcomes for patients, and financially more efficient. And as you heard in the board strategy session, we are developing the strategic outline case. And thirdly, the continued development of our rehabilitation pathway and the enhancement of the community offer. You've heard me describe previously, when we talk about our updates on community transformation, the development of our community rehabilitation services in West Sussex, and in July we're just about to mobilise or remobilise the West Sussex Discharge to Assess service, which will be a hybrid discharge to assess and crisis house. So really quite exciting opportunities. And the final slide, please. I'm not going to go through this in detail, Chair, but it is important, I think, to recognise that there are, of course, with any of these transformational processes, an element of risk. And you can see those highlighted there with the associated mitigations. So I think probably opportunity for Colin and I to pause and take any questions as you may have. And if you wouldn't mind taking down the slides so we can all see one another, I'd be more than grateful. Thank you very much.
Peter, you're on mute.
Oh, so I am. I'm not sure how I managed that. My apologies. So thank you for that. I think it was very clear. I think that it's very helpful to know where we are now, what our ambition is and what the steps are to get us towards that ambition. So I think that's really, really helpful. So I'll open it up for questions, and then I'm clear that there's a need for us perhaps just to be clear about exactly how far our appetite extends in this space. Teresa.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Colin and John. Just a reflection, really. I think this is a really excellent example of the direction of travel that we've been talking about for some time. So I just wanted to share that. And there was a point in the slides around outcomes, and I was struck by the outcomes that ELFT and, sorry, I can't recall the other organisation that you spoke about, is recording in this space. we
It's
prepared?
it's look ahead housing and care.
Oh, thank you. But also recognising that the organisations that have also done similar work to this are recording very clear outcomes. And I think given the conversations that we've had organisationally around being able to really be clear about the outcomes that we're aiming for, and that we have the data set and that we're able to take that from baseline right through. So what is it that we're trying to achieve, and have we achieved it? It just struck me that we could be using the types of metrics that those other organisations are using to be able to evidence the same thing.
Thank you, Teresa. I think it's really valuable point. Anna.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That issue about continuity and integration and really prioritise outcomes. My question was just looking at the risks and mitigations. I mean, the last one about, risk of local voluntary sector providers not having capabilities. I think that's a really important one. And I suppose I just wanted to understand a bit more about the conversations that are going on now about building capability, number one, and number two, early co-design with people lived experience, so that they're with us from the beginning in terms of this is what we want to provide, but we need your help in shaping it and giving it color and sort of detail. So just wondered, were there any comments on that? I just want to say also that's a really clear account. So thank you so much to both of you, both your update and the written account.
So in terms of the kind of the working piece, so we lead on a multi-agency housing sort of strategic kind of sort of group, which includes both ourselves, obviously our ICB commissioners, the sort of the local authorities, but really importantly, some of the kind of sort of voluntary organisations that specialise in this space, and South Down particularly is one of our sort of strategic kind of sort of partners. So the conversations about a lot of these developments are absolutely being done in partnership, and I think it's about that being really clear around what are the what are the expectations that we need to be able to have of partners to be able to kind of manage this, and what's our role in supporting and upskilling, but also actually we have to have a sort of a threshold of expectation, because we know our clinician, that sense of trust and responsibility and all of that sort of the framework will be the things that drive the decision making that all of our sort of collective staff will be. So there's a high degree of kind of co-development going on at this point in time through that kind of sort of working group, and then as and when the strategic outline kind of case comes back through, I think that's our opportunity to really scrutinize and assure ourselves around those particular sort of risks and the confidence of the mitigations to then be able to take this on to the next stage.
I think it's fair to say, Colin, that these two final risks kind of sits together. So there's a recognition amongst the providers that we need a bit more clarity about models and standards. And then we can then co-produce the solutions to closing any capability gaps that there are. And I think that's probably an important next step, that we get a bit more clarity about models and standards. John.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to acknowledge heavy lifting from Chris Harris, the Associate Director of Housing in this area. So Anna will certainly pass on thanks to him as well. I have the pleasure of chairing the group that Colin mentions, and we have two colleagues with lived experience of mental health supported accommodation co-designing with us. So I do feel that is represented. And I think we're fortunate. So whilst we are describing different models, we are fortunate that there is a level of expertise within Sussex. And we heard from Alex earlier today in the patient story, who has obviously received care from a provider for which we work closely with. And final comment from me, Chair, Teresa's point around outcomes, I think is really well made. If I think around the piece of work that we're currently undertaking with our system partners in West Sussex to provide and or potentially subcontract commissioned support into the discharge to assess model, we have been really carefully developing an outcomes framework, so it will build the evaluation of that project.
Thanks, John. That's really good to hear. Kevin.
Loved it, unsurprisingly. I love the care that went into it. I love the approach, the diligence and the thought and thinking about where we want to get to, but also more importantly, I suppose, that it is the start of something, right? And it's hopefully the start as we move towards focusing on the things we're really good at and devolving and sharing out things we're not so well, not best placed to, or too expensive to deliver. And that's brilliant. I'm wondering about this approach and if it's going to carry on and be applied elsewhere, because it really speaks to me, and we're kind of working backwards from where we want to get to, but we're working with people to get there. In terms of the evaluation, and I guess going back to the VCSE kind of state of readiness, if you like, I think it'd be really good if we had that lens on the evaluation itself, almost like a maturity assessment of the VCSE sector in the area that we're working, if you like, so we can understand that sector. And then when we come to write up and to learn from what we've just done, does it also include what have we learned about partnership working? What have we learned about the state of readiness of our VCSE partners? And what have we learned about the governance of it? So it's not just, ironically, I'm always about the outcomes, but also a bit of the process in there when we're writing up and learning.
Good.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Colin, I'm assuming that's yes.
Sorry, I had a fire thing come past and I suddenly thought you're going to just hear a squeal. Yes, absolutely agree, Kevin. And I think one of the things that we've already started to see, so through the mental health programme and the board that Jane chairs, we put some investment into the VCSE over the last kind of sort of 12 months for them to start to think about actually how do they start to work together on a kind of a place-based footing, and actually how do we then be able to start to work through some of those particular challenges in terms of big statutory organizations and smaller kind of agile VCSE when we talk about the kind of the plethora and the plurality of kind of what's out there. I think we've already started to see a maturing and a stronger kind of alignment within the kind of the voluntary sector in working with us that I think will allow us to really start to kind of sort of take those to sort of take that opportunity. But I agree, I think there's a lot of learning in terms of the how we do this, because I certainly think that sitting on a lot of the sort of the regional and the national calls around the kind of the community transformation framework, which really has VCSE as a kind of a sort of a central kind of element of it, it's one of those challenges that I think everyone is kind of sort of grappling with and kind of sort of working through. And I genuinely believe that I think we've got a real opportunity to become a sort of a leader in this space, as opposed to just a kind of a follower playing catch up.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you both for this report. I think it's so positive and so much a move in the right direction. Just a very practical question about, I'm looking at your first slide and the number of delays and people who can't move due to the delays. And just what is the current housing provision stock, and what's the gap in terms of the needs of those who are waiting for homes and those who I'll put it the other way. What's the level of housing provision, and what's the gap in terms of the level of need? How much will they have to build? You talked about new models of housing. So how much will need to be built in order to respond to the need? Some sense of that?
I'm happy to come in, Chair, if that helps. Just to give you a flavour on the numbers, Joe. So today there are 80 patients waiting for onward care and support who are currently in our inpatient units, who we've assessed as being clinically ready for discharge. I would anticipate around 50 of those will require some level of what we would describe as adult mental health supported accommodation, and that will be a variety of 24-hour care through to self-contained accommodation with a level of floating support. But it's not just about units. It's about the clinical model that can support people with a level of complexity. And I think that's the real gap. It's not just the local authority needs to procure 50 new units of accommodation.
It's the supported. That's the effect. That's the important part, isn't it? It's whether
it is.
It will have the appropriate support, which will enable us to move from the inpatient to the more community-based.
Exactly that, Joe. And it's the level of support, because many of those patients who've been with us a long time have really complex needs that require something quite specific from multiple agencies. And I feel fairly confident in saying we have fewer less complex delays, because it's we with system partners find solutions. It is really about the complexity. Does that cover it?
Yeah, that gives me certainly a better, I suppose there's a part of me about managing up my expectations about what this is going to do, because I do feel it's a very positive move in the right direction, but it's clearly not going to happen overnight.
I think, oh, sorry, Chair.
No, go on.
You're absolutely right, Joe. It's one of many things that I think will support our wider challenges around acute care. I think there's a preventative angle, as Colin's described to this as well. It's not just on the hospital discharge piece. However, many of the people that we look after who have the longest length of stay are the people with the most complex needs. Even resolving a small number of those buys a fairly considerable gain in terms of inpatient capacity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's worth, I think it's implicit in what you just said, John. It's worth pointing out that people, only a very small number of people with complex needs need complex housing. There's then a whole big group that need less complex housing, but they still need complex levels of support. So it doesn't, sometimes we conflate the two, and that's unhelpful, because it's actually an incredibly small number who need something that's bespoke. Right. Any other?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Okay. Well, I think that Alex, the service user who shared his story with us in a previous meeting, I think really brought this to life in terms of the lived experience and what we could do upstream as well as what we could do downstream. Clearly, some of the figures here in terms of the proxy 5 million cost, 10,660 days focuses the mind and makes it clear why this is important. I think we really support the desire to move upstream and to do more to reduce housing stress as a driver of need and potentially of and to make sure we've got the right models that support people who do not need to avoid emission where that's the right thing to do. Clearly, there's some work that is well underway in terms of embedding housing expertise within our multidisciplinary teams, and we're expecting that to have an impact. My sense is that the board does indeed have an appetite to exercise more agency in this space and to think about how we can move our rehabilitation models into less restrictive environments and make better use of resource. That we probably do need to therefore develop some clear models and some clear capabilities, and then work with our voluntary and community sector partners to look at what necessary capabilities we need to have, and to make sure we've got a shared understanding of risk and a shared understanding of quality. Thank you so much. I thought this was really clear, and it's really good to see that we're getting some traction in this space, that we've got good progress to report and clear plans to shift the dial on this. So thank you particularly to Colin and to John, and I hope it's okay to say to Chris as well, who's not here this afternoon. Thank you very much. There's a risk I start enjoying myself, so I'm going to move us on and move to the integrated performance report. And I think I'm looking at Usman for this.
Thanks.
Obviously, you may assume that we've read it, and I think what would be good would be where do you want us to focus, and where do you want to focus the conversation?
Thanks, Chair. I just briefly wanted to touch on the fact that it's a slightly new report. So I was just going to spend a minute or two just talk through that, and then I think it's I won't go through the whole report, but there are a couple of areas that I would just like to draw colleagues' attention to in terms of what we're doing about some of this. So to start with, as part of our move to our sort of new place-based operational structure, thinking about what kind of KPIs do we need going into this year, we've been looking at our existing performance framework and set of KPIs. So that is going to work its way through all the usual processes, with a view to hopefully having that in place for sort of during Q2. But that's more about the performance framework. That's sort of recognizing that our new place-based structure is still being developed, and so we didn't want to sort of do that separate to that process. However, recognizing the new year and in conversations that we've had through some of our previous sessions, we've restructured the performance report so that it focuses a little bit more upfront on sort of core metrics that we think are sort of reflective of some of the areas of focus that we talk about when we talk about the quality agenda, or we talk about the safety agenda, or the finance agenda. And so those 12 core metrics that are set out there on the third slide just give on one page a bit of a snapshot of the safety agenda, the workforce agenda, and finance issue around our agency spend. Because I think, as we've linked to through our breakthrough objectives, all the work we've done, these are the kind of the areas that we want to know. Not to say there aren't lots of other KPIs that we monitor continuously. And there's a whole series of national metrics, which are also in this deck. But that's why that front page is focused the way it is around those particular areas. So, notwithstanding that, it's probably worth highlighting 4 of those areas that we've just talked about remain off target and frankly are of some concern. So those are the ones that I'm going to just briefly touch on. Of the other 8, I think it's fair to say they're not quite where we would want them to be, but they've been consistent. And again, it's where will we prioritize our attention and how do we get those into a better place? So in terms of the areas of concern, I guess the things that just to highlight are on the complaints. We have started to see some improvement, but clearly it's significantly below where we would want it to be. And we've spent quite a lot of time over the last week as an exec agreeing what is the set of short-term actions over and above what we have already previously set out that we will be taking. And so I think our next time we meet, we'll be in a position to share that recovery trajectory. I think it is worth noting, though, that there's been a really significant qualitative improvement in terms of our complaints and the learning that is coming out of them. And that has been really, really important. But I think we're not ignoring the fact that we also need to improve the actual response rate. So that was to pick up that. In terms of the SIs, I won't talk about it in length because it'll picked up through the quality report and update, but it's just to draw the link that, again, one of our core metrics is focused around how do we get a sense of where we are on that from a safety perspective. And while the number appears to be going down, we still recognize that there is work to do to make sure we get all of the learning from those, which in short, Teresa will talk through in the quality section. The other bit I just wanted to draw colleagues' attention to was the agency pay spend. So it wouldn't be the same if you heard from me and I didn't talk about agency spend. So you'll see that we have made some progress in the sense of where it was inexorably rising from that period sort of starting July, it has flattened out. The challenge for us is bringing that down. So when we cover off in the finance section, I'll talk about some of the work that we've been doing on that. And that's sort of where I just wanted to draw people's attention. All of those other metrics, we've set out in the deck, both a summary of what we think the causes of that are, and then some of the actions that are currently being taken. Clearly, this is the sort of first version of this new style IPR that we've looked at, and we will iterate it on feedback, but I hope that covers off the key points there. What you'll notice after that section on terms of those topical metrics is we have put a very brief one-pager on finance, just so that you can use this deck to look at the whole trust position. And then starting on slide 10 is where we are against the national standards. And we've also put in there some benchmarking. So where do we sit against everybody else, or as far as we're able to identify other organizations? Again, the exact formatting of this is still a little bit of a work in progress and subject to some change over the next month or so, but we will have it finalized and ready by the end of for the next board meeting when we next meet. Peter, I'll stop there because I can see lots of hands.
Indeed, indeed. I mean, I think that, as you say, it's work in progress and it's very early in the year, but I think this does make it much easier to see quickly what's material and also what are the actions we've got in place where things are out of line to bring things back into line. And I think that's something we've been wanting for quite a while. So thank you. Thank you for that, recognizing that this is something that will continue to be worked on. So I have got Nitin, please. Why don't you come in first?
Thanks, Chair. Two things. First, a comment on the agency spend. I was at Langley Green with Colin last week, and speaking to people on the ground, I know they are seeing a reduction in agency usage, which is great because obviously it's not going to happen. We're not going to move the dial from one month to the next. It'll be a slow progression, but it's good to talk to people and see, yeah, they're seeing more bank people come on, less agency. There are a few points we took out from that where you can take that offline. The second bit was on complaints. Yes, we are far off on our targets. I just wanted to understand what's the difference in handling of complaints in the corporate, which is 100%, versus East Sussex, where they're really lagging. So is there a difference in where the complaints go to, how they are handled? That's number one. Second, are there themes of complaints that we can look at? Are there buckets of what are the stress points? And I would love to understand what are the complaints talking about rather than just the response time of the complaint. But
Okay, so shall I go to Dan?
Oh, yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Peter. Sorry, I was going to start to answer, but I'm happy for Dan to respond.
So a couple of questions there around themes. How can we be more preemptive? How can we be more preemptive? But also there are some quite big variations here between 100% and 33%. I think that's a crude summary of the sorts of issues Nitin's raising.
Thank you, Chair. And the short answer to that last question is numbers, smaller numbers coming in around corporate services. In terms of the resolution, medium to longer term, our continued focus on early resolution remains key, as does strengthening the local, divisional, operational involvement in complaints management. Right here and right now, as Usman said, we've made good progress on improving the quality of response in relation to content. We aren't where we need to be on the quality of our response in relation to timeliness. I think the short answer to what are we doing about that is the need to refocus our resource, which may mean in the short term scaling back some of the other things we want to do, but to enable us to really get on top of the caseload and to get our process working as effectively as possible to get responses to people.
And are there buckets of, are there,
Yes, sorry on that one. Yeah, absolutely. And there's more we need to do to look at the themes and triangulate complaints data with other sources of intelligence. But one example, we know from last year that 171 of the 960 odd complaints related to waiting times. So that's one example of a clear theme.
And what does 33% for East Sussex tell me?
So we have a particular challenge across adult services within operational services with capacity to help us fully investigate and resolve the complaints. So one of the things we are doing right now, and we need to do more of it, is lean into operational services and help with that heavy lifting. So it's a pragmatic issue that's around the backlog coupled with new incoming complaints that are arriving, every day and every week.
Okay, Nitin, does that address your concern?
It does, and I would just be interested, and maybe it's for the next time, to look at the themes a little bit more. And I know waiting times might be one, but just to better understand what are people complaining about. Yeah.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. I just thought I'd come in because I read every complaint and every response, so I can get a sort of nuanced view of what's coming in. But I also think it's important to say that the themes are reported through to Quality Committee.
Yes.
So they are triangulated and taken through. I'm not sure we've got the headings right and the categorization right at the moment, but my sense reading them, there's this block that are around waiting times and process and those sort of intransient challenges that we can see through our IPR that are reflected in the complaints. Then there's a group around some people who may be unwell, and I think we're not communicating with them in a way that was helpful for them to recover.
Yes.
And assuming that so the process is being followed correctly. So there's nothing wrong with the process and the protocol. It's how it's communicated and how we bring the patient and co-produce their journey and their treatment with them. And I think that's why one of the reasons why we wanted to put that through the breakthrough objectives is because that sort of lack of communication and co-development, shared decision making about care comes through quite a lot in the complaints, but it's sort of categorized as staff behavior, and it doesn't quite give the nuance to it that it needs. So I think we've got some work on categorization, but I'd say it's that co-production bit that is in there a lot.
Yes, and of course we could improve those percentages down and miss the point. So there's something about just getting that right balance, isn't there, in terms of making sure we're sticking to the point as we go along. Anna.
So just to quickly add to that, Nitin, the report comes to Quality Committee. Very happy to share that with you to see, work in progress. But I absolutely agree with Jane that we're trying to kind of understand the nuances of this at the moment. So the one thing I wanted to add to the conversation about complaints was, and my question about this was what's, and Dan, you'll forgive me if I've a bit of a broken record, but I want to know about how we are keeping people in the loop. So I think we've talked a lot about how we're improving things. I think it's also about explaining that we're doing things differently in the hope that we're going to get better. And I think patients need to know that. I mean, I just think it's about prioritizing communication with those who have complained. And I know we were improving that, but also more generally, what we're putting out there through comms about this whole challenge of doing better on complaints. So that, I mean, I'm not looking for an answer. I'm just sort of saying, I think that's the other element to this that hasn't been covered in the conversation so far. Can I just ask a couple of questions? So just in terms of feedback, I think this is really good, clear. I think I'm getting much more from it. So really welcome that. I think just to be very pedantic, I think the summary on page 16 is really good as well, because so many people, including myself, just need to be reminded of what these charts mean and how we can interpret them. So I think having that there and keeping it there, frankly, is a really good thing. I just wanted to check on, because I've sort of honed in on quality pages, on serious incidents on page 4, are those dates? So that in the summary, it talks about grading a serious incident April 2022, but is it 2022 or 23? Because this is an SPC chart about the reporting of the escalation of those serious incidents. It's not talking about the volume of reporting, which obviously comes to Quality Committee. So at the moment it feels slightly disconnected from the reporting that we get. But I also just wanted to check the accuracy of that. Is it 22 or 23? Just a
Pretty
very
confident, Anna, sorry, that should say 23, not 22. So apologies for that.
Ah, okay.
That's a
Okay.
typo, which I will make sure doesn't happen again.
That's okay. It's just for you know,
No.
for going
No.
forward. So can I just very quickly say that, so my question really then, so those are clarification. My question is on page 8 about supervision. I wanted to ask whether the issue that we've got is with the actual supervision or with the recording of the supervision, because what was really helpful to me was to see that there's a difference. So whether staff have had supervision is one thing, but whether they've then been able to access the system to say it's been done. And I wasn't clear what we're reporting on here. So, and it does feel quite important. Sorry again if I'm being a bit pedantic.
No.
No, I don't think it is. So I'm sure others will come in on this particular one, but briefly, the metric is saying what's been recorded in the system, in effect.
Yep.
So it doesn't reflect whether it's been done but not recorded. But unfortunately, until it's recorded, we can't then report on it. And we have followed this up through the new staff quality performance reviews for all of those areas where we have got underperformance. And I think there is a challenge around recording has been raised. And I think we're looking at some options to help make that easier and to understand what digital team can do to help sort of streamline that. I think one of the other challenges, in particular with the corporate team, and it's been picked up through their reviews, has been the particular timing for the corporate teams of when this was done. Means that some people are just about to have it done and it's not actually been recorded yet in terms of some of those supervisions. But I don't think it takes away from there is a high level of variation. And I think, you know, I will hold my hands up. We often talk about our clinical operational divisions. This is an area that clearly highlights we've got work to do in our corporate teams. And I think we have committed internally that we pay as much attention to where that performance isn't where we would want it to be as we do for our operational teams. So we're following this sort of up quite a lot through our new quality performance review meetings.
Okay, so Kevin, I'm aware that you've got your hand up. However, I just want to check. Jane, did you want to respond to that point?
If possible. So I completely agree with us when he picked up the point at the end that I was going to pick up. But I think it's important to say there are recording issues, but I also think there's a compliance issue as well. I don't think it's just recording.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we acknowledge that not everyone is getting supervision in the way that they should do, and that's reflected in our staff survey. And so it's something that Fumi will be leading the improvement on, but it's definitely in hand.
Okay, and by the same principle, can I just check, Dan, were you responding to something as well? So Dan, why didn't I let you come in as well?
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly to say to Anna's point, and I should have said this actually, a big focus over the last 5-6 months has been on having those conversations, both from operational services and from the central complaints team, to keep people appraised of the process, but also to understand the nature of the complaint. And I think that's really important, that we maintain that early resolution, that focus on conversations, and we get the timeliness right. But it's a bit of a delicate dance to get all three right. We're not there yet.
No, we don't want to go back to 100% compliance, but every letter says your complaint wasn't upheld. No. Colin, were you responding, or are you coming in on a separate point? Okay, so Kevin.
It's okay, Chair. I think I'm heartened that our abilities to recognise patterns seem to be fairly homogenous across the piece, because the last two questions covered my question, so I'm fine. I don't need to. No further questions, Your Honour.
Okay, thank you very much, Colin.
Yeah, it was just to add an additional comment. So Jane made reference in her chief executive report around the shared delivery plan that was being signed off this week by our ICB colleagues. one of the things that we'll be able to sort of see within the kind of the performance report kind of going forwards as well will be around the elements of the system shared delivery plan that we as an organisation are directly accountable for delivering. Because when you look at the mental health and LDA component of it, there are a number of kind of key metrics there. For example, access to specialist perinatal services, which is a system deliverable, but we are exclusively accountable for it as an organisation. So we'll be able to have that kind of sort of that read through from system delivery to organisational delivery as part of this report as well.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Jane?
Yes.
What are you pleased about at this stage that's coming through in this report?
The thing I'm really pleased about is that we know what's happening now, so that we're able to respond, and we're responding quicker to things. So we're becoming more responsive. I think I'm also really pleased at the progress that we have made, and I'm hoping it will come through in the data as we go forward around the agency spend and the out of area beds. I think, as I say, I hope it will have a financial impact, but the way that the trust has come together in a really positive way is I think, has signalled a new way of working in the trust, and is something we can build on going forward.
Thank you. So, thank you, everyone. So, I think we should just note that what the Chief Justice just said. You know, we have been focusing on out of area. We've been focusing on agency spend. We're not complacent, but at the moment, those feel under control. It's a movable feast, but they feel under control, and that clearly that has been a big achievement by many across the trust to get us there and to keep us there. So we note that and celebrate that. I think, you know, you have highlighted to us that, you know, complaints is, yes, there's a metric here, but complaints is a cultural piece. There's something about making sure we understand why someone has taken the trouble to complain. How much can we work upstream? How can we resolve the complaint, as well as wanting to see response times improve? And we recognize that there's a backlog there, and it isn't just about hitting the target. We need to make sure we're getting the point as well. And we support that work. We recognize the issue around supervision and the need to keep a focus on supervision, because of the way that links then to staff satisfaction, and that comes through in the staff survey. And clearly we've talked about the issues around serious incidents. We welcome the structure of the report. We recognize there's a bit more work to do in terms of understanding what are the actions that are going to shift the dial. And we recognize that will come through. And I think perhaps next time we see this report, we might want to focus a little bit more on some of the benchmarking data. It's good to have it here. We haven't looked at it much today because it's quite early in the year, but perhaps that's something we could also have a look at. And we would like to keep the SPC guidance in front of us, please, because I think it's useful to have it there and remind us what it is we're looking at. So, I mean, really good report, and clearly some big issues there, but it's, as you say, Jane, it's good to have this. It's good to have the data and feel we're standing on it feels like we're standing on more solid ground, and that's good. Right, so Quality Committee, please.
Thank you, Chair. You have a short summary of the issues discussed at Quality Committee, and I just want to apologise that you haven't got a longer report at this board meeting. That was due to my oversight. I dropped the ball and was away on annual leave, and I'm afraid it hasn't arrived in time for the board papers. So apologies for that. You have then three appendices: the Learning from Deaths report, the draft quality plan, which was also seen at the Council of Governors the day before Quality Committee on the 24th, and the annual report on safe working hours, which gives assurance that our junior medical staff are being managed safely and within recommended limits. And I just want to come back at the end to the revised terms of reference for Quality Committee. But just to sort of by way of expanding a little on the report that you have in front of you, I think we very much welcome the progress and improvements on reporting at Quality Committee, moving in the right direction. You know, like everything else, no room for complacency. We're not there yet, but we really welcome the reports that came to us and the clarity and brevity that we've been looking for. I think we're seeing more linking of reports and data more routinely. So, for example, the clinical audit, the annual clinical audit plan and the quality plan, we spent a lot of time talking about how those two documents and the work that's described in them will be linked together. And we also, in terms of themes, welcomed the increasing usage of, you know, examples of good practice from elsewhere, and the emphasis on whole systems approaches and reporting on collaboration with our partners and our ICB colleagues in particular, for example, on the work on suicide prevention. So in terms of the integrated safety report, we again were pleased to see that there were a number of downward trajectories on, so a 13% decrease on fatalities, with that continuing strong focus across the trust and with its partners on suicide prevention since same quarter last year, a 15% decrease in falls, a 43% decrease in serious incidents, again, since this time last year, but overall a 5% increase in the volume of reporting on incidents. And that, again, reflecting our commitment to, being a learning culture and encouraging more reporting of incidents. So that was very much welcome. We noted the good rating by CQC of the Avenida Lodge from the Avenida Lodge visit that came through the 9th February report, and particularly, and has been reported elsewhere, the commentary about the culture, the compassionate, the care and the quality of care from staff. So we were mindful of the importance of noting that. Often those smaller services just get forgotten. And finally, I'm nearly there. We agreed with the comments from governors on the need to improve the format and accessibility of the quality plan. So some great stuff in there, but the format and accessibility, I know, works ongoing to improve that. So obviously I'm happy to take questions on the papers that you have in your pack, but my final point is just to seek approval on the revised terms of reference for Quality Committee following the governance restructure, which we've already talked about. And I just want to note one amend, which was we want to, it's not included in the current version, but wanted to make sure we included a reference to our governor observers in that document. So seeking your approval with that amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Teresa, I don't know whether you want to add anything there.
Thank you so much, Anna. So just two things as a follow-up, really. So firstly, to say that the up-to-date final draft of the quality plan will come to QC at the end of June, taking account of all of the feedback that we have received. So thank you very much for that. And just a point on suicide prevention, both internally in terms of the SPFT work that we will be doing on suicide prevention, but also with our system partners. There is a second clinical and professional leaders session facilitated by the ICB, so Alison and Dinesh, at the end of the month. And Peter and I have agreed this morning that we're going to be asking for the focus there to be on suicide prevention from a system perspective. So I just wanted to give that further update. And I've just noted Jane's point in the chat. So from a terms of reference perspective, we should update that. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions on the Quality Committee report? No? Okay, well, thank you for the report, and thank you for keeping us up to date on that. Can I just ask, are we happy to approve the terms of reference with the 2 amendments that have been put forward? One to make reference to the 2 Council of Governors observers, and that it should say Quality and Risk Management Committee rather than Quality and Risk Committee in the terms of reference. It appears that we are. Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you, Teresa. Can I now move us to the Finance and Investment Committee report, please? Nitin.
Thanks, Chair. I will take the report as read. Just an overview of what all we covered. We talked quite a bit about the RISE's full business case, which we're going to be discussing later on. So I'm going to save some of my comments on that. Talked about finance reporting. Jane mentioned the 0.4 million deficit in month 1. It's too early. I know we are sort of improving, but obviously, if we continue on the trajectory, we're looking at a 4.8 million at the end of the year. We also have a 3.6 million unidentified efficiency that we have to get to hit our plans. So overall, it's about 8.4. Obviously, very early in the year, and we are hoping that we can improve on the trajectory and find the 3.6 million that we started off the start of the year. Aside from that, we talked about the Bates printer update extension, which we are going to be discussing later as well. And finally, we had the self-assessment review of the F&I committee. I was a little bit disappointed. We only had six members responding. Last year, we had 16. So something for me to probably push everyone to definitely respond to. Overall, it was positive, but there were two things that came out. One was an over-reliance on one committee member. I'm guessing that's Usman. But we did not have a free-form text, and that's a learning for next year, because it's difficult to contextualize some of these without someone giving actual written feedback. So for next year, I would love to give people an opportunity to actually write some text. Of course, it's all anonymous, but it'll be great to get some context on some of those ratings and better understand them. Okay. But that's about it.
Okay, thank you very much, Nitin. Are there any questions for Nitin? Okay, well, we won't speculate any further over who people felt we were over reliant on, but we will work to strengthen the committee as we go forward into the year as well. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Finance report. Situation happiness.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, I think Nitin has covered off some of the points, so I won't go through all of it. I just wanted to draw attention, I guess, to a few points. Again, as you go through this report, you will notice we have made some small changes. So I think we've tried to build on the feedback we've had and been really clear about pay spend, non-pay spend, listening to some of the feedback around just members asking for clarity, or board members asking for clarity around sort of just how we'd previously presented it. And I think what we've then tried to do on some of the key areas, both in independent beds and again, the workforce section, just create some really easy headline numbers that people can sort of look at and get a sense of what is happening. So I'll just mention that. In terms of the key sort of finance report, Nitin's already discussed it, but I think it's just worth highlighting. We ended the month with a £1.3 million deficit, which was £355,000 more than we had hoped to, with the plan being circa £1 million. The principal drivers of that overspend were the independent beds and some of the CIP that has not yet been identified. Board members will note that when we signed off the plan, there was as part of the stretch targets to get to break even, a level of unidentified savings that we are continuing to develop through, but it was, as we highlighted at the time, unlikely that those would have been ready for month one. So in terms of the independent beds, I think just to give some assurance, given that it is one of our key CIP targets, we averaged 53 beds used in April. That was down from 62 in March. So it was above our 45 target, but it was a significant improvement, and that reduction continues. And I'm confident that when we report May in the next day or so, that we will see further improvement against that and us moving closer to that target trajectory. In terms of workforce, I guess the thing I just want to highlight is in month one, we didn't really see a significant change from the run rate that we had been seeing, but that was not unexpected given that a lot of the work only got implemented from the beginning of May. So again, in that first month, we weren't expecting significant changes to the run rate position, although we have seen further reductions in off-framework agency usage, and we've seen agreement from a number of agencies now that we work with to come more in line with our agreed rates, which hopefully should help support the delivery of the programme going forward. The last thing I will just, I won't talk about, I'll take it as read, but you will note in the finance section of this report, just to sort of give full clarity on it, we've included the financial recovery slides within this finance report so that you can see just more individually where we are against the specific work streams and where we are against the sort of both the delivery rating as well as the finance impact of that sort of delivery scheme. So I think it is only month one. We recognize month one was always going to be a bit of a challenge given how late it took to finalize all of those plans. I think it is really worth highlighting that we did deliver £1 million of saving in month, and that is more savings in a month than we delivered at any point last year. So I think the message is that, that cultural change we need, because it's all good and well me talking about it and creating sort of action plans. It's the people on the ground who need to believe it and deliver it. And I think from some of the feedback we've had from colleagues who've been to sites, staff do get it. They're taking it seriously. They recognise the challenge. It's not always easy, but I think everyone is sort of coming around. How do we actually deliver this? How do we take these sort of actions and be part of the process? So I'll stop there and happy to take questions.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's good to note that we are, at the moment achieving those savings and that's getting embedded. So I have visions of you standing by a hot dot matrix machine, getting the May's figures will come out. When do we expect to have those?
I actually will get them tomorrow morning. My team are meeting this afternoon as we speak. So I will get a readout later on today and early tomorrow morning. I think I won't speculate. The team will work through it, and we will, the first sort of quarter will report in July, and then we'll go through it in detail, both through the Finance Investment Committee and then subsequently through the board.
I mean, it's to be picked up outside the meeting. I'm just conscious that the board tends to meet early in the month, and as we hit the different quarters, it becomes a little bit more critical which figures we're looking at, but we can take that outside. Yeah, Joe.
Thank you, Usman. I just wanted to pick up on the last point you made in relation to culture and mindset, because as I read this, I know it's easy to look at it and think, well, that's actually not a lot of savings. But in fact, given the amount of work that your team and colleagues have been doing and bringing on board the divisional leaders as well, I think that this is actually a reflection of beginning to see some sort of positive shift. Because if you remember at earlier in the spring audit committee, when the internal auditors report came through on financial sustainability, in relation to the recovery plan, they they gave us a partial assurance because the effectiveness of the recovery plan wasn't apparent. It was too early to say. But I think this, for me, this seems to be a real indication that it is going to make a significant difference. So thank you for that. On the second point in relation to culture and mindset, though, are you able to say at this point where you feel there may be potential obstacles in terms of people not getting on board with this? Because I think you know, the independent bed spend is, to some extent, it's not always in our control. It's very much a need-led, but the agency spend is definitely something that is in our control. And again, I know that you've brought together groups of people to work collaboratively in addressing this. So it'd be helpful to understand what some of the knotty issues are continuing.
So I think on the knotty, so I think I can't say that I've spoken to all the staff in the trust, but all the staff I interact with, and that has been a lot over the last few months around these specific issues, I think understand what we're doing and support it. I think the broad recognition, everyone knows we have to be able to live within our sort of recurrent position. I think the challenge, as you've described it, comes from we are under real pressure from an activity and demand perspective. The teams are really busy, and managing change while also trying to deal with the today, I think, is a particular challenge that as an exec team we've all been thinking about. How do we create this capacity to get to the longer term change? In terms of the short term, I think the level of resource we are committing and the amount of time that is being committed to some of those control processes is probably not sustainable going forward, and it's not something I'd want to do going forward. It doesn't work. And I think what we need to be really clear on is when do we exit out of that? It becomes part of business as usual, and then we sort of spend that time doing more value-added things. But I think the challenge always is, and I'll be honest about this, our transformation journey will take 2 or 3 years. And we know that we've got plans in place for it. The improvement plan sets that out. It's how do we get to that stage while still sort of doing everything we have to do, and sort of grip and control is going to definitely be part of that. So I think that side of it is okay. Our real challenge, I think, will arrive if we are not successful in recruiting permanently. That is going to be our real risk, I think. And FUMI's already identified a series of internal improvements to process we can make, and I think those have been really, really welcome, and it's been great to sort of already start to see the feedback of that. So there's on us, how can we be efficient, but then it's also what does the labour market look like? How do we recruit those people? Because our savings plan is predicated, as we discussed at the planning stage, on significant amount of recruitment, 164 net new people joining, helping cover off those really expensive agencies. So that remains a risk. And I think it's worth saying that on the medical side, while we are making real inroads on the sort of agency nursing, HCA side, and reducing those volume of hours used and price paid, we are seeing the sort of reverse of that on the medical side at the moment. And I know we're going to be doing some work with Peter to help sort of identify very specific targeted actions that we can take in the short term to help resolve that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So I've got a few people wanting to come in. So Nitin, and then Peter, then Dan, then Teresa. Nitin.
Keep this short because I think Usman just said exactly what I wanted to say, which was, personally, I'm really pleased with the trajectory of our efficiency, the way we are going. The 2 biggest cost drivers, agency spend and beds, we are seeing improvements in them. As Usman said, if we, as long as we continue going in the right direction, we will end up this year in a much better place than what we started, and a much more sustainable position as a trust than what we got in. And that's really, really critical. We might not get to the end of it. I know it's too early to say it, but the fact is we're in the right direction. I just want to keep pushing us in that direction. And hopefully by the end of the year, we'll see a real change. And that's it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter.
So whilst I can't take credit in 28 days for destroying the progress that you've managed to make in the last month, Usman, I do take responsibility for it. And we had a great conversation earlier today, and also me with Funmi, about what we're going to do about tackling the medical piece of this. And the board might like to just have my thoughts on the culture. So the cultural is, we have tended to replace like for like, and we have tended to move from locum to locum. And to me, there hasn't been the robustness of check and challenge on whether that is the way we need to do things. So in this first month, I've been pleased to test the water with a couple of workshops run by my team, just to see if there was the curiosity and interest of consultants being prepared to work differently or work through non-medically qualified other roles. And the short answer is yes, there is curiosity and there is a willingness, which is very encouraging. The shift in the nursing position is very attractive, not only financially, but from a quality point of view, because a reduction in the use of agency is one of the things we need to do to meet our suicide prevention targets. So I'm interested in going forward as to how the combined effort of medicine and other professions on this will come through quality committee on the one hand, where we would expect to see quality gains for getting to tenured establishment, and financial gains through finance investment on getting the right money together, which will help. And then the final piece will be through people, where we begin to see a different balance of complement servicing the transformation. And I think, Usman, you're quite right to set the challenge over a 2 to 3 year frame. And what I would want to be doing is bringing back to board a very clear medical workforce plan with key milestones through the piece, with those three kind of indicators coming up through the committees that you've all helped us co-create and see. We're getting the right people in the right jobs, we're delivering the quality benefit from that, and we're living within our financial means. And that will mean, me working with the consultant body to agree to reduce the complement or modify the complement sufficiently that we get the work done differently. That's going to be the difficult piece. And that's my challenge really from this month, with the support of Usman and Funmi, to get the medical workforce strategy and team in place to deliver it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Dan.
Thanks, Jed. Just to add to the point around culture, I mean, obviously the scale and nature of change we're undertaking at the moment is significant, and it's multi-layered. We need to be clear with people about our expectations of them. We need to be directive. We also need to bring people with us through engagement, co-production and clear communication. And Funmi and I are working on a staff engagement plan at the moment to help us do that, because it needs to be an area of particular focus for us as an exec team and an organisation.
Brilliant, thank you. Teresa.
So thanks, Jet. I've left my hand up, but with fear of repeating some of what Peter said, I think the two points that I would draw out from that is one around the workforce planning that takes account of multi-professional, registered and unregistered competency-based recruitment. So how different might that look to recruiting like for like, but within the context of the transformation work streams? So the transformation will require us and enable us to recruit a very different workforce, and we're going to need to think about it very, very consciously.
Thank you. So, and then Funmi, good to hear everyone else talking about people, recognizing it's not just down to you.
I know, I was thinking of not saying anything actually at some point, because I thought everyone's made all my points for me. I think I just wanted to, and I won't repeat anything that everyone else has said, but it does show that as an executive team, we are all together on this, and we're all jointly taking responsibility and accountability for it, which hopefully will give the board some level of assurance in terms of our plans. What I did want to talk about was, and I know Joe mentioned that around the piece around the culture and the mindset that we're going to be needing in terms of moving forward with this whole new vision, as it were. And I say new vision, it's not really new vision, we've been talking about it for ages, but what it does show, and I'm sure you will all have seen this, is that there is a great degree of change in terms of how we want to do things, how we will be doing things, change in terms of the pace at which we do things, and change in terms of creativity around introduction of ideas and of plans. What that means is that we will need a framework or a context of a cultural change that allows us to take on all these different behaviors, knowing that it doesn't mean we don't trust people, or we don't or we feel that people are ineffective in how they do things. And I just wanted to call that out specifically, that in and amongst all of those things is that constant awareness for us in terms of managing the well-being of the people that we do have and the teams that we do have on ground, but also giving ourselves the freedom and the boldness to act. And so you will see that coming across in how we will be engaging with the board, but also asking you to continue to hold us to account on both assurance and reassurance on all of these things that we've said, but on the measurable outcomes parts of everything that we've said. And I just wanted to say that, you know, apart from the process and the system, there's a culture around the environment within which we want to do this.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Usman, what a finance report, eh?
It's great when it's a team effort.
Good. So, I mean, I think that you know, we keep saying it's early in the year, but it is good to see that some of the trajectories are right. And yes, we've got the improvement plan. That's obviously a long-term process, but we are starting to see both the grip and control and the cultural change that we need to see to make sure that we get onto the right trajectory, so that we can then start to think about spending money in the right places and the places that we want to do. And I thought that was a really interesting conversation about how we can support people into the roles we need, but also create the jobs that people can do, and then make sure that we've got the right sense of well-being for our people and the right culture within the organization. So thank you very much for that. And no doubt, as Funmi says, these are things we will pick up as we go through the year, in terms of both making sure that we understand that and that we're holding ourselves to account, because it's so important. So thank you very much. Can I move now to the Audit Committee?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the report as read, but I just want to highlight two or three things. The first is that I'm delighted to report that for another year, we have received a clean internal audit opinion that is a reasonable assurance, which is always much welcome, especially as our finance team put in a great deal of effort in working effectively with our internal auditors. But coming out of their audit reports, the one area of concern, which we, in fact, at our last meeting we discussed at length, is our response, the internal response to the management actions that come out of their audits. And that you will notice that there are 25 management actions outstanding. Now, some of those are not due, but in fact, what they've picked up, and we've in fact picked up, is that some of those actions are constantly being, the deliverable, the timeline is constantly being pushed back and extended. And there doesn't seem to be any particular reason for it other than it just doesn't get the attention and the priority that it needs. And there are examples which I won't name at the moment, but that is something that finance have taken on board and will speak to the relevant managers about, in terms of actually making sure that there are clear action plans and they're delivered in a timely fashion. The other thing that we also discussed at some length is the implement, and again, coming out of the internal auditors' end of year discussion, was the Trust's response to the learning that comes out of their report. How is the information disseminated and how is it implemented? because again, whilst we know that it goes to the exec and there is usually some very considered discussion of it. What they are not seeing is a clear line between how the follow through and the impact on the services and the areas that they have reviewed. So that's something again that we will, as an audit committee, be continuing to look at in more detail and more closely in this financial year. And Kevin, I see that you're nodding. Was there anything else you wanted to add? No. Okay. Thank you, Chair. So open to questions.
Okay. Are there any questions for the Chair of the Audit Committee? There aren't. So, I mean, I think obviously we note your comments about the need to see those action plans delivered in a timely fashion, but also to get more assurance that internal audit and external audit reports are being properly disseminated and that the actions are being followed through. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
and Chair, could I just add that I think for the Audits Committee self-assessment review, we probably got more than 6 responses.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not competitive or anything. I'll take a bit of time.
Thank you for drawing that to our attention. Thank you. Okay, so can I now take the annual review of board declarations of interest? Those are for noting. Can we note those, please? And then the sealed documents report. Can we please notice the use of the seal? Note the use of the seal, sorry, not just notice it, sorry. I haven't had any other business, in which case I suggest that we